Wars and plagues are awful times, but interesting things can happen in the chaos. Calcified structures of power are shaken as gender and class barriers become fluid. Within this, there can be an opportunity for change for brave people who step up. In this video, I'm going to explain how the English Civil War in the 17th century led to new intellectual and creative opportunities for women. Let me start with the role of women in the early modern era. By early modern, I mean the time period spanning the 16th to the 18th centuries. Nowadays, when we're ill, we all go to the doctor. There's a group of established professionals who were there and they treat all our medical needs. Before the 18th century, your general practitioner wasn't a place you went to or a person you called. You received your medical care in the home, and the primary person who gave you that medical care was the woman in the house. Known as kitchen physic, home is where all healthcare began, both preventative in the form of good eating habits and a healthy environment, and curative with the making of remedies and distribution of them. In urban environments or wealthy households, a physician might be called in, but for the vast number of rural families and urban families of the middling sort, calling in a physician was considered non-essential and quite expensive. Households would keep handwritten books, which were collaborative compilations of the household's knowledge of remedies and recipes. These books were known as herbals, and in these books, recipes for food and medicine would be listed together. At the time, there was no clear distinction between the preparation of medical recipes and the preparation of food recipes because food and medicine were considered to work together. Each one had a positive or negative effect on the body. This was also the time when people believed in balancing the four humors of the body, all of which were connected with food. And food is where women already had an established role. This early modern overlap of medicine as food and food as medicine worked in women's favor. Through their socially sanctioned roles as both cooks and healers in the house, women were authorized to practice, write, and exchange knowledge in the areas of both food and medicine. Before the 17th century, these precious books were handwritten, and they were kept within families to be handed down generation through generation. But the 17th century was a truly wild time, and that is when everything changed. While everyone else was focused on whether or not England had a king, another revolution was taking place, a printing and literacy boom. Before the late 16th century, printed news was scarce. With the exception of ballads offering superficial coverage of salacious events, reading was for the elite. This left few options outside oral communication for the middle and lower classes. Kings and queens have always worried what was written during their reigns. Very few English subjects would think of putting even vaguely challenging words into print. This could be considered treasonous sedition and you could be put to a truly horrific death. But in the 17th century, a whole shocking chain of events happened that completely changed the landscape of printing and literacy. First off, in 1604, King James I authorizes the translation of the Bible into English. This is known as the King James Bible. Although there had been previous translations of the Bible into English, this was the first widely accessible version. Having a Bible to hand, written in the language you speak, is huge, because Bibles before were written in Latin, which was a language that common people didn't speak. So even though they couldn't read, at least now the Bible was in a language they already spoke. So if the new English Bible provided more of an accessible means to read, all the wars and the chaos provided the desire. So let's talk about the wars. First off, we have the 30 Years' War, which is the longest, bloodiest conflict in European history being fought on the continent. So in the middle of this war happening in Europe, we also now have a very unpopular ruler back home in England. When James I died, Bible James, his son Charles I took the throne in 1625. He was not very popular. He levied high taxes, and 4 years into his reign, he dissolved Parliament, ruling as a dictator until 1640. This, of course, was one of the major events that led to the English Civil War. That began in 1642 between the parliamentarians and the royalists. If the general populace were hungry for news before, in the total chaos of civil war, they were ravenous, and this further fueled a growing print culture. When parliamentarian Oliver Cromwell defeated the king's forces in 1646, he took control of the country. The imprisonment and eventual exile of the king in 1649, the exile of his son, the abolishment of the monarchy, the change in who the hell was running the country at the time, all of this was breaking news that needed to be printed, and it concerned everyone in the land. Cromwell did not have an easy win. The Scots refused to accept Cromwell's government and claimed power. Both England and Scotland raised armies to do battle for the English throne once again. Cromwell overpowered Charles II and his army in 1651. Victorious in defeating the monarchy, Cromwell now took total control of England, calling himself Lord Protector in 1653. This reign is known as the Commonwealth. With the fate of the country being decided on the battlefield, many long-held structures of power began to fall apart. One of them was the previous ubiquity of print censorship. People were mad for news. Printing procedures had never been cheaper, and there was no one in government minding the store. As print freedom exploded, people got a taste for other possible freedoms as well. Following the Parliament's victory over Charles I, hundreds of ordinary London women petitioned the victors for religious liberty, freedom of the press, and greater political participation. They felt that little had changed following the end of the conflict. The idea of women participating in this kind of activity was not universally accepted. The term fishwife developed to make fun of women who got above their station and took part in protests. Britain's Civil War gave some women the opportunity to move beyond the traditions that had bound them for hundreds of years. But for most women, the idea of getting parity with men was many centuries away. And while sadly these women lost their fight for official recognition, there were other changes building under the surface that the government couldn't control. The period of the Commonwealth was relatively short. 5 years after Cromwell became Lord Protector, he died. He left the role to his son, but he wasn't much successful in the role, and he resigned in 1660. This was the end of the Commonwealth. Then the exiled King Charles II came back, and that was the restoration of the monarchy. However, Cromwell's time in power utterly changed the landscape of England. Political debate was now common amongst people, and the cat was out of the bag when it came to printing freedoms. Both the availability of printing materials and the public's newfound hunger to read them led to an increase in literacy levels. Now, unfortunately, this did not reach the levels of the lowest laboring poor, but even the lower working classes were starting to gain some literacy in levels never seen before in history. And this happened across genres of print. So the political turmoil of the 1640s and the 1650s led to an increased production of medical books. Second only to political treaties, medical books were the most popular books at this time. And within this genre, there's an appearance of common language medical literature directed specifically to women. During this time, a number of medical books written by women and for women were in print. But women speaking out in print was not universally well received. Shocks. In the emerging renaissance of print cultures, there appeared various unauthorized elements. Women speaking in print, women speaking about sexuality, and women speaking about medical matters. These issues, if we can call them that, were all conflated into the one issue of female impropriety. Maybe they can now do it, but not everyone liked it. Print became an increasingly attractive and lucrative option for women. Post-Restoration authors like Hannah Woolley made quite a considerable living by publishing her recipes and cookbooks. But even then, most women still shared their recipes handwritten through the generations within families, and this continued up through the 18th century. Home is an important space in the history of medicine. And more broadly speaking, women's role in medicine in the home is integral to any study of women's role into the wider fields of science. This research is just one piece of what I'm uncovering about the hidden histories of women in medicine. All of my findings I will be sharing with you at the Museum of the Home this summer in my exhibition, Women's Weeds. Please come by to learn more.